This weekend, the Coinbox IRL will be going down in Washington, D.C., an event ran by Hungrybox himself, and after this weekend's Sumobato SP43 dropped from a major to a national, is going to officially be the final major of this ranking season. It's an invitational where the 12 players who have ever won a Coinbox, along with 4 players who make it in via a last chance qualifier, will throw down versus one another to battle it out in the true showdown of online taken offline. But there are actually quite a few people who don't even know that this tournament is going to be happening at all. And so today we'll be running down everything you need to know, including who's going to be there, who's in the running for winning the LCQ, and who has the best chances to take the entire event. Just a reminder before we begin that if you want to support me monetarily, you can do so by using the links to my Patreon or channel memberships in the description below. With that out of the way, let's go over the 12 initially invited players. Coinbox IRL was announced 9 months ago. Geez, has it really been that long already? Along with the announcement of the final Melee Coinbox, which, given what we know now about Nintendo's guidelines, there's a good chance that that won't be the final Melee Coinbox, but that's a video for another day. With the initial announcement of the IRL Coinbox, the 12 players to have won a Coinbox before were all invited to take part in the prestigious invitational. These players are, in no particular order, Dabuz, Riddles, Armadillo, Meister, Send, ShinyMark, Siski, Skyj, Sonics, Spargo, MKLeo, and Jazar. Now, some of these names might seem confusing to you, but you gotta remember these are the players who have won a Coinbox at any point from the series' inception. The earlier meta of Coinboxes was more dominated by a different meta, with players like Send, Armadillo, and MKLeo getting victories, even though when you think of Coinboxes today, you usually think of the trio of ShinyMark, Sonics, and Spargo. Oh, and this also counts the European Coinbox, which Siski was the winner of, hence why he's on this list. Now, unfortunately, both MKLeo and Jazar were unable to make it out to the Coinbox IRL. But HBox, in a move of brilliance, decided that their replacements should be up to popular vote, kind of like Summit. It was a far simpler voting system than Summit's, just being a simple the 2 most liked replies, but it still resulted in some good picks. The 2 players voted in to replace Leo and Jazar were TM7 Zap, a Bowser Jr. main who has top-8'd several Coinboxes but also has good offline placements and wins, his most notable offline win being over Riddles. The second player voted in was Chunky Kong, the Donkey Kong extraordinaire that needs no introduction at this point. Me personally, I'm glad the Twitter audience had the taste to not only invite in 2 exciting players, but players of characters that you will rarely see at a major. Even if Zap and Chunky both don't win a single set, we're still going to see top-level play of these underrepresented characters. So now that we've gotten these initial invites out of the way, let's get on to something a bit more speculative: the last chance qualifier. As I mentioned earlier, the top 4 players from the LCQ will qualify for the final bracket, giving us a grand total of 16 players at the Coinbox IRL. And while I could give you my list of notable entrants from this tournament, Hungrybox actually released his own. And why listen to me when the box has spoken? So, from HBox's list, notable entrants at this LCQ include, in no particular order, Lima, Mr. E, Peanut, Pink Fresh, Wrath, Syrup, Jake, Show, Oolong, Guy, Yoda Cage, Smub, PK Chris, and this weird player I've never heard of named Plus More, whoever that is. Now, this list wasn't in any order, and while you may have thought it was ordered by seeding, you'd actually be wrong. Who are the 4 seeded players to make it out of the LCQ? They are, going from the 1st seed to the 4th seed, Lima, Wrath, Syrup, and Pink Fresh. Let's go over these players one at a time. First things first, if Lima and Wrath actually do fight in Grands of the LCQ, Wrath is almost certainly winning that. Firstly, because Sonic is considered to be Bayonetta's absolute worst matchup by many Bayo mains. For some, like Lima actually, Sonic and Snake are Bayo's only -2 matchups. Other Bayos, like my personal favorite Despade, will say that Sonic is Bayo's only -2 matchup, and as he's beaten Apollo Kage multiple times, I'm inclined to trust Despade. But also, Wrath and Lima have actually fought before, recently at that, in Losers 8ths of Genesis Black, where Wrath defeated Lima handedly. However, if Lima can avoid the blue blur at the LCQ, then betting on Lima to take the crown there is a safe bet. But again, top 4 is really what matters, not actually winning the LCQ. In regards to that, Lima has a pretty chill path into top 4, with Show and Mr. E in the way, as well as Pink Fresh. Now, we'll get to Pink Fresh later, trust me, but for now, other than that, Lima's got a pretty decent path, with no bad matchups until Lima actually makes it into top 4. Given Lima's recent performances, I think Lima qualifying is a pretty fair assumption. I think Lima is a good pick for the final tournament, given how good they are, but I may be about to shock you all with the hottest of takes. I actually think that Wrath making the final bracket is a really good thing. I know, it's Sonic, I get that, but the Coinbox IRL is supposed to be a Coinbox, but IRL. I know, shocker, right? Wrath has actually placed top 3 at the last 2 or 3 Coinboxes and has quickly been established as one of the Coinbox's signature top 8 finishers. Not having Wrath there wouldn't be truly representative of today's Coinbox meta. Sorry if you're looking for a top 8 with no lame characters. Go watch my video on Santa Paws from yesterday if you want that. This is the Coinbox. It's kind of defined by characters like Sonic, Pikachu, and other quote-unquote lame characters. I think it would kind of be against the nature of the tournament series to not realize that. Wrath's path into top 8 is Hungrybox into Show into Guy into Syrup. Again, we're going to talk about Syrup later, and that's an interesting case, but I think the matchups, both character and player-wise, are doable. The most interesting one here, to me anyways, is Show. Meta Knight, and heck, Luigi for that matter, are both spontaneous characters that can sometimes just blow you up for one interaction. Especially considering Sonic's lightweight, it would be quite interesting to see if Show or Guy could pull out a victory. Guy also has a Greninja secondary, but given how bad Sonic is supposed to be for Greninja, I don't think we'll be seeing it personally. Also, Wrath has to face Hbox, who, if you didn't see, took a game off of Sonic's in the most recent Coinbox. Now, I'm not saying that Hbox is going to defeat Wrath. What I'm saying is, how funny would that be if he did though? Syrup is a player that recently made a big breakout at the Big House 11, placing 2nd, beating Lucky, Mr. E, and getting a win on Pocket. Syrup is seeded to lose to Wrath in Losers Finals. This would seem to check out given how Sonic is supposed to hard beat Steve, but to be perfectly honest with you, sometimes it feels like Sonic's is the only Sonic player who actually defeats Steve's. I mean, at the Big House 11, Wrath was double eliminated by Steve, losing twice to Pocket. And I mean, yeah, that's Pocket, 2nd best Steve main worldwide and the best in NA, but a lot of people underestimate Syrup. But again, whether or not Syrup places 2nd or 3rd doesn't really matter as long as Syrup makes top 4. The path to make it there includes defeating Yoda Cage, Oolong, and lastly, Jake. This set though is the one that poses the most intrigue for me. The top 4 qualifier is a Steve Ditto, and while Akola and Pocket are the 2 best Steves, a lot of people are quick to forget that the first Steve to make major waves was Jake. Jake was the first Steve to top 8 a major after all, and while Jake doesn't really go to many majors like that anymore, there's this weird hunch in the back of my mind that we may be witness to a return from the OG Steve. And listen, Dittos are always weird. You want proof? I won money match Dittos with Game & Watch versus Ploopy. Yeah, I just brought that up in a video that's going to be viewed by hundreds of people, and no, I'm not money matching you again, Ploopy, because if I do, I'll lose. Either way, we know that Syrup is proficient in the Ditto, taking a set off of Pocket before, but again, Dittos are weird. This is probably the one top 4 qualifier that has the biggest chance to cause an upset. Pink Fresh is seeded to place 4th, losing in Losers Semis to Syrup. Now, again, what exactly happens in this top 4 doesn't exactly matter in the long term, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Min is supposed to beat Steve. Not like a +2 beat, but still beat. Listen, when it's Steve, you take what you can get, okay? We've seen proof of this in places like Japan, where their best solo Min Doramigi is actually up 3-1 lifetime over Akola, but all 3 of Doramigi's wins were in tournaments that didn't count for rankings. That one set that Akola won, by the way, he swapped off of Steve and won the set with his Roy. That's right, Akola spelled with a K. If you didn't know that Akola had a Roy before this, you're welcome. Now you know. In NA, DeBuzz recently went Min versus Jake at Cirque du CFL 2, and Jake considers that matchup to be so bad that Jake swapped off of Steve and onto Bowser. When you go a heavy versus Min because you think it's the better matchup, let me tell you, that says some things. The other matchups in top 4, Sonic and Bayo, are pretty much even for Min, but both of them are very volatile, with the potential to just kinda die. However, again, who cares about top 4? What does Pink's bracket path look like? Well, Pink Fresh is supposed to beat Mercury and Jake before losing to Lima and lastly defeating Oolong. And, well, this is where we find a roadblock. Normally, I could give you any kind of insight into how these sets will go, but the issue here is that we just don't see Pink Fresh at majors very often. Pink Fresh is mostly a regional threat, not traveling too much these days, especially recently. Again, given the matchups, I think this will go as seeded. After all, we just went over Jake's Min problems, and from there, all Pink has to do is win Min Wii Fit, which is a matchup I'd consider, well, not good for Wii Fit. But again, out of everyone in this top 4, heck, this top 8 seeding, Pink Fresh is the most unknown variable out of anyone, and is the player that I'll be watching the closest when the LCQ actually goes down. I'd recommend that you do as well, and yes, I did just recommend to every person here that you actively watch Min sets. Guys, it's the Coinbox IRL. Let's just embrace a little bit of cringe for one tournament, okay? Now we've gone over our top 4 seeds, but who else has the chance to make a big run? Let's quickly go over some big names that you'll probably recognize. I would love to say that Mr. E could make top 4. However, Mr. E must have angered some Lovecraftian god, as Mr. E would have to defeat both Jake and Syrup to make it into top 4. And yeah, just in case you were wondering, Steve is legal at the Coinbox IRL, despite having been banned for months now in the actual Coinbox. This is really weird to me, to say the least. I don't know why HBox would have that be inconsistent, but honestly, it's fine. In all likelihood, we're going to be seeing at least one Steve at the Coinbox IRL through the LCQ, so maybe HBox will end up regretting this decision later. We'll just have to see. Going back to Mr. E, everything else, defeating C and PK Chris, is very doable. But Mr. E doesn't exactly have good records against Steve players, so the chances of Mr. E winning against 2 of the best ones in the US are slim to say the least. Additionally, there's one side of loser's bracket where I think nearly everyone could actually qualify, as it's filled with some uncommon characters going up versus some very good ones. Pink Fresh is seeded to make top 4, and Min is actually really good versus a lot of these characters, including Peanut's Little Mac, Oolong's Wii Fit, Guy Guy's Luigi, as well as being even versus both C's Palutena and Show's Game & Watch. However, there are 2 characters here with a really good chance to actually defeat Pink Fresh if they can make it there. I mentioned Show's Game & Watch, their secondary, but Show is a Meta Knight main, a character that is considered by many to be Min's worst matchup. In that scenario, Pink Fresh probably goes Marth, but who knows how that would go. I also mentioned Guy Guy, who mains Luigi, but has a nasty Greninja secondary. Greninja can be placed anywhere from -1 to -2 on top Min matchup charts, with some Min even considering it to be worse than Sheik, and honestly, I can see the vision there. Of course, C and Peanut both are good players, and they both could make it to top 4, but for different reasons. C plays Palu, and in the face of some characters like Meta Knight or Wii Fit, has a chance to just tear gap some of the other players here. Peanut plays Little Mac, who is really bad, but Peanut has the clutch gene, and when activated, could land Peanut a spot in the top 4. Other names to look out for are Smub and Creepuba, who, if Creepuba makes one upset over Zelda main Aloe, could fight each other. If they do, that is definitely a set to watch, as it may be the only time we can realistically see a high-level Ridley Ditto. And lastly, we have Yoda Cage, who could potentially make a run to top 4 by defeating PK Chris and then Mr. E, but would then have to fight through the Steve gauntlet of Jake and Syrup. However, tell me that Yoda Cage and TM7 Zap fighting each other wouldn't be hype as hell. That's right, you can't. That about wraps it up for the LCQ. I think that Lima and Wrath will 100% make it into top 4, but the other 2 spots are kind of up for grabs. The main 2 things to watch being the Steve Ditto of Jake versus Syrup, and also the one part of bracket I mentioned earlier, where realistically, 4 or so players could honestly make it into top 4. It's now time for us to move on to the actual Coinbox IRL main bracket. For the sake of this speculation, let's just assume that the LCQ is going to go exactly as seeded, and that the top 4 seeds will all make it out. Again, that probably won't happen, but just for the sake of argument. Let's quickly go over the seeding for the final bracket, and I'll give you my thoughts. First of all, can I just say that it's kind of criminal that this bracket isn't round robin? At least for the first phase or something? Sorry, that just kind of bugs me, I guess. After invitationals like Wave Champions and Watch the Throne both used round robin, seeing Coinbox IRL not using it disappoints me, as there are a lot of matchups here that I'd love to see happen but won't because it's just a double elimination bracket. Anyways, the seeding should be finalized, so let's go over who will be fighting who. Oh, and a side note, no, I'm not entirely sure how the LCQ top 4 will fit into this bracket once they're decided upon. Will they fight each other? Start final bracket from losers? It's not clear and probably won't be until it happens. With all the disclaimers given, let's get into it. The last 4 seeds are Send, Chunky Kong, TM7 Zap, and Armadillo. These 4 being at the bottom makes a lot of sense. The vote-ins being the last 2 seeds is typically how invitationals do things, so no surprises there. But Send and Armadillo are both players from the beginnings of the Wi-Fi era and won Coinboxes way before the current era, so it makes sense. But how many of these players could potentially go far? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like any of them will. Keep in mind, everything I'm about to say right now will probably be undone by the addition of the 4 LCQ players, but I think it should relatively hold up, since those 4 are likely going to be the last 4 seeds and therefore will be fighting the top 4 seeds who currently have first round buys. So the matches I'm about to talk about should still happen. Maybe. The one player in the last 4 seeds who has the potential to make upsets is actually Armadillo, who's seeded to fight SkyJ round 1. The reasoning behind this is simply, well, it's 2 relatively bad characters. It's the only one of our last 4 seeds that isn't a seemingly impossible matchup, and just in case you think I'm exaggerating, Send has to fight Meister, Chunky Kong has to fight Siski, and TM7 Zap has to fight ShinyMark. Game & Watch is debatably Ness's worst matchup, and Pikachu is definitely not good for Junior and is an infinitely better character. Surprisingly, the one matchup here that seems kinda doable is Chunky versus Siski. DK Samus is actually not as bad as you might think, as DK can combo the heck out of Samus. While you may be reminded of the last time a DK tore up top EU competition, Hikaru's run at UFA 2022, it's worth noting that Hikaru didn't actually fight a Samus that entire bracket. Still, it's a very doable set from Chunky, and Chunky is also a player known for having that clutch gene, so it's definitely a set to watch. Some of our bottom seeds have a bit better luck in losers. Send is seeded to fight SkyJ, not a bad matchup by any means. TM7 Zap has to fight Siski, which again is not as bad of a matchup as you might think, but unfortunately Chunky has to fight ShinyMark and Armadillo has to fight Meister, 2 matchups that are extremely bad. Interestingly enough, the 2 players who have doable winner sets actually have far worse loser sets than the players who probably won't win their round 1. Send and TM7 Zap can actually be somewhat fine in losers, but Chunky Kong and Armadillo may be forced to make their round 1 upset or be faced with an unwinnable in losers round 1. Our next 2 bottom seeds are Meister and ShinyMark, both of whom seem extremely underseeded to me. I mean, for both of them being top 8 Coinbox mainstays, how are both of them seeded to get 7th? ShinyMark has won multiple Coinboxes and is seeded to lose to SkyJ. And while you could say that Siski being above Meister makes some sense, given the bad matchup for Samus, I think there's an extremely high chance that Meister beats Siski here. I think this seeding must have been done like this to avoid conflicts or something, because in my opinion, there's no other way that ShinyMark should be seeded this low. Our next 2 bottom seeds are SkyJ and Siski, and Siski losing to Dabuz, yeah, makes sense. And I did just get done saying that SkyJ won't beat ShinyMark. However, if he does, and he goes up versus Riddles, well, I don't know if you saw the last time the 2 of them fought, but yeah. SkyJ has a really good chance of upsetting Riddles here. I understand why Riddles is seated above SkyJ, I'm just saying that if this set happens, be prepared for a repeat of their set at Port Priority 8. The next seeded loss is Riddles losing to Dabuz, which, yeah, makes sense given Dabuz beating Riddles at Kagadibi and CEO, but it's always been at least close. Dabuz, though, is next seeded to lose to Spargo, which, given their set history, makes a lot of sense. Although, worth noting is that Dabuz has beaten Sonics before, so if Dabuz faces Sonics in losers finals instead of Spargo, there is potential for an upset. And lastly, we have our top 2 seeds, and as you might have been able to suss out, Sonics is seeded above Spargo. This makes no sense. This is another situation where I'm convinced it was done to avoid conflicts of some kind, as not only does Spargo defeat Sonics a majority of the time in Coinbox Grands, but recently defeated Sonics somewhat dominantly at Watch the Throne, notably being done with Cloud. Now, giving credit to Sonics, Sonics said that he would be ready for the Cloud next time, and I mean, let's be real, Sonics had no reason to think that Spargo wouldn't go Aegis at Watch the Throne, so he had no real reason to prep for Cloud. That's why it was such a perfect pick in that scenario, but the Cloud will not be catching Sonics off guard this time. Now, that's not to say that Spargo won't win, just to say that it will at least be closer. And I'd be remiss if I lastly didn't mention that at the most recent Coinbox that happened yesterday, Spargo won the entire thing with solo Corrin, defeating Sonics Game 5 in Grands. Corrin is a character that Sonics has lost to before, notably at Wave Dash vs MKLeo. Will Spargo, knowing that Sonics will prepare for his Cloud, pull out the Corrin at Coinbox IRL? I'm gonna be real with you, there's almost no shot, but it's a fun thought. And hey, I said almost, so if it does happen, you can't make fun of me. In the end, the LCQ entrance likely won't shake up this bracket too much, and a lot of the top seeding seems solid. At the very least, having Spargo, Sonics, Dabuz, and Riddles as near top seeds is a pretty safe bet. My main thing about this bracket is the fact that I believe that ShinyMark is insanely underseeded, and I think that Meister and SkyJ have a very good chance to make big upset runs. But we're going to just have to see what happens when it starts this weekend. No matter what goes down, you better believe I'll be here to cover it all for you. That's going to be it for today's video. Before I go, shout out to my patrons Seth Laster, Frostgold333, and my tier 2 patrons Iltis and Diamond Blaze. Additionally, shout out my YouTube members Stormtrooper, Locosoko, Diarrhea, Teacher Jr., Defective, Orangabang, and my tier 2 members Mike G and Wu-Tang Forever. Additionally, extra special shout out goes to my tier 3 patron Ocean Man, who says, Mr. Mice is sorry for playing Min Min. If you want to support me using any of these methods, links are in the description below. Tomorrow, I'll be covering Toyota Grand Slam 16, but until then, I've been Mr. Mice, and thank you all so much for watching.